This is the Neurosurgery Podcast. Welcome back to the Neurosurgery Podcast. Here we are with another installment in our series, A Neurosurgeon at the Movies, and we are honored to have on someone I've been wanting to have on the show for years now, Dr. James Schuster, a titan in the field at the University of Pennsylvania, formerly the program director there. Big fan of your work in spinal trauma. I remember interviewing with you there 5 years ago now, and it's just a delight to have you on the show and be able to talk about some of your favorite movies, appropriately, the Rocky series there in Philly. So, Dr. Schuster, welcome to the show. Take a moment and say hi to the listeners.
I'm humbled. I didn't really, I'm honored to be on. I mean, it's great that you asked me. As you say, I've been at Penn since 2001. I trained at the University of Washington. Before that, I was a med student at Duke, and then we were talking about before. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. I went to the University of South Dakota, so that's a little bit my Rocky story. Coming out of obscurity and being very fortunate to end up where I'm at. But thank you very much.
Well, every champion starts as just another contender, as the man said. But before we dive into these movies, because, on a lot of these episodes, we talk about a few movies. And when I was emailing with you about what we could discuss today, you said Rocky. And I thought, well, great. There's so much to draw from there, appropriate for Philly. So before we dive headfirst into the Italian Stallion, talking about your history, your background, and, our brief interaction on my interview trail, I'm told that you and Dr. Wang have met before in the long days of yesteryear.
We have, and we're just saying, neurosurgery is a small world, and it's amazing how these relationships develop. So, when I was a resident at the University of Washington, Mike came as a sub-I, and Mike remembers we used to have Saturday conference, which was just terrible because the last thing you want to do. And our departmental offices were not in the hospital; they were sort of down the street in this sort of freestanding building, and the only way to get in was to be buzzed in through the front. And so we're all up on the second floor, and I'm sure we had, you know, sent Mike off to do a task for us, and so he wasn't there. And then all of a sudden, we hear a knock on the window, the second floor window, and we look out, and Mike had scaled a fence, scaled this building like Jason Bourne, and was like knocking on the window, and everyone's like, "I like this guy. This guy's this that." So that years ago, that as the success that Mike has had doesn't surprise me at all, based entirely on that one interaction with him. Because I was just like, most people would just stand at the front door and buzz the buzzer, but no, like overcame all adversity to make it into the. And I can
Now,
tell you, Dick
now that
Wynn.
you bring that up, okay, I remember when I knocked on the. It was basically like a little balcony that was
Right,
independent.
right,
There's no
right.
way up, and I couldn't get in. And I was actually. Do you remember Dolores, the nurse practitioner?
Yes.
Dolores and I would hang out, right? And I don't know if like we had a thing or not, but
Right.
I ended up late. I'm like, oh, I got to get up there, so I scaled. And then when I knocked on the patio door, Dick Wynn actually opened.
That's right. Yeah,
And he
yeah.
goes, "Are you smoking out on the patio?" I'm like, "No, I just want to get to conference." And then he said to all the residents, he said, "You see, this is the determination. This
Yeah.
is the letter to Garcia attitude everybody has to have to
Oh,
come to conference."
yeah, 100%. And I mean, I can tell you, Dick was a hard person to impress, and you so impressed him. And so for him to use this letter to Garcia,
Yeah.
just for background, Dr. Wynn, when you started resident, gave you this book, this letter to Garcia, and it was about this essentially, this guy's given a task that's essentially a suicide mission, during the war. But like, if he wanted you to do something, that's how he ended up. He's like, Jim, letter to Garcia. You're like, okay, Dr. Wynn. So,
And
yeah.
for the people who don't know the history, right? At that time in history, sorry, not UVA, but University of Washington was the place where you trained. At that time, I remember everybody from Stanford went there. It was the sub-I to do because UCSF was going through that Phil Guten stage where it was like very weak between Charlie Wilson and Mitch Berger.
Right.
Stanford was weak. UCLA was kind of in Neil Martin-ish, and then USC was kind of okay. And everybody went to University of Washington. I'm just going to name some of your compatriots out there that are quite famous now: Alex West, Gavin
Yeah.
Britz, Kyle Kim, the
Yeah.
late Charlie Kuntz,
Right.
Nitin Tandon.
Yeah.
Who else besides you? You guys are all like notables now.
Yeah. I mean, Bob Rostomily, Mike Hagland,
Mike
you know,
Hagland, yeah.
Andrew Daly. I mean, it was a great time to be there. So absolutely.
Yeah,
Now,
it was
Tony
fantastic.
Avellino,
Me
Tony.
Avellino, yep.
Yeah. So
this is remarkable because again, for everyone watching and listening, completely unscripted. We did not plan this, but I have heard that story before. I have heard it not from either of you, but I remember being in medical school in Miami when I was first starting to work with the department, people talking about Dr. Wang behind his back in a good way. And they said, "Oh, you're working with Dr. Wang? Oh man, that guy's crazy. I heard when he was a medical student, he like climbed a building or something." I have heard of that story trickling out into the ether.
yeah, yeah,
What a small world it is.
yeah,
But I mean, thinking about that determination, what better context to talk about that and that unwillingness to give up, that drive to just keep going no matter what, and talk about the Rocky saga. I mean, for anyone watching or listening, we're not going to tell you the story of Rocky. You should already know it, and if you don't, just go watch the movies. He's a boxer, and it never looks like he's going to win, and then he wins, and then he just keeps doing that over and over and over again. I grabbed some of the best quotes. There's this one when he's talking to his son in the later movie Rocky Balboa. It ain't about how hard you hit; it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward, that's how winning is done.
yeah,
And I mean, what could be more appropriate with that story of Dr. Wang and with the saga of neurosurgery and the training process, the selection process, getting in, keeping going, learning. So, Dr. Schuster, talk a bit about why, besides the Philly connections, these movies resonate so much with you.
Well, I think we were talking about before. I saw that movie when I was 12 years old in middle school, and I was
Mm,
like an awkward, redheaded kid who played soccer instead of football. So like
yeah,
and so the reason I like those movies, because if you look at like the action movies now, and then there's so many metaphors for life, for neurosurgery, for everything. Is now if you watch a one like a Jason Stratham movie or something, he's like never can be defeated no matter what.
yeah,
And the beauty of those movies is there's like our heroes are flawed, and it's really about self-doubt. Through all of those movies, he's like comes from nowhere, doubts himself, and then digs in hard and gets the job done. And so, you know, whether it's whoever it is, Clubber Lang, or who it is, you know, it doesn't, we run into those all the time. It doesn't have to be a person, it could be like an extremely difficult case, but we all deal with like self-doubt. At least I do, and you sit down and but all through there there's things about friendship and mentor and family. So the first movie I love the most. To me, that's one of the best movies ever made. And then the other ones are good for a while, and then they sort of start tailing off a bit. But I like I said, I see it as such a metaphor for my life personally, but also whether it's residency. It's just like I tell our residents, no, there are no unique struggles. Everybody hits. Everybody. I'm sure. As a resident, you're like, I'm struggling with whatever it is, and then you talk to one of your senior residents, you're like, man, you're in great shape compared to when I was a 4 or a 6. And so, that's really why I like those movies.
yeah.
Jim, let me ask you about this because it's interesting you say that. I think the Marvel universe has ruined all of cinema in some
Yeah.
ways. And in Rocky One, I don't want to. I mean, everybody's seen these movies, right? He actually doesn't even win. He just survives the
Right.
rounds, right? He
Yeah.
just manages to survive. It isn't until Rocky Two that he actually
Right.
starts to win. But by the way, congratulations to your Eagles.
That's right.
My wife is a hardcore Bills fan, so I hate the Chiefs. And she just
Yeah.
told me
Yeah. Yeah.
last night she's going to New Orleans. She got tickets. She's going to watch the Eagles beat the Chiefs
Oh,
next
wow.
Sunday.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, and I just want to diverge a little. You've been at Penn for a quarter a century, 25 years, right in Philadelphia, in the heart of it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about another movie that's a sidebar in this, which is that Mark Wahlberg movie, which is a true story, right?
Yeah.
Mm,
Invincible, right?
Yeah.
In this movie, this guy who's like a washed up dude is given a lottery ticket to basically go play with the Eagles, right?
Right.
Something like that. It's kind of like the Rocky story, right? Is this like a Philadelphia thing, like you're a stepchild in New York? Like, what is going on here in Philadelphia?
Well, it's amazing because it's really the true life Rocky story. Like if you've not seen it, where there's this golden ticket, opportunity. They have this like tryout, and the actual person Vince in actually it's interesting. I met him one time, and that guy's tough because let me tell you the story. They were My son and I were watching the collegiate lacrosse championships in Philadelphia, and we were sitting there, and there was someone from the news uh, interviewing him, and there was like someone took a shot, and like a missed shot. It hit him right in the chest. You could see that like like hard as it could hit in the chest. Didn't hardly even flinched. He just sort of looked and kept going. I was like,
Lacrosse. So they're using lacrosse.
yeah,
Oh
lacrosse,
my
like
God.
someone, like shooting at the goal, missed, and like hit him right in the chest. Didn't miss a beat, just kept going. I was like, and this guy's the real deal. So, but
So is that like in Philadelphia, like there's this sort of grittiness, right? There's this
there
sort of
is,
like survivor mentality, right?
yeah.
Like is that why Rocky came out of Philadelphia? Is that like
I
a
mean,
thing?
it's funny because we were talking about like if you walk around South Philadelphia, you're like, there's Paulie, like or you see guys that are like, wearing the leather jackets and the hats still, and like that look like Sylvester Stallone. So I think there really is this sort of like, um, you know, obviously it's a city with a long history of like, immigrants, especially Italian American immigrants, but all nationalities coming to the city, and so I think there is this sort of people of people have really embraced that sort of underdog, Rocky. They see that as they're not concerned about being as sophisticated as New York. They're like, no, we're the real deal. So
Yeah, it's funny you talk about the realism of Stallone's hero in this movie, and comparing it to the other action heroes of the day, and especially where we've got now in American cinema. Because I mean, first of all, for all of our listeners, go back and look at the story of how Rocky got made, because Stallone fought with that story to get it made for years and years. He wrote the screenplay. He insisted that Rocky lose at the end of the movie. They wanted to have a happy ending and everything. And so the story of him getting the movie made is kind of an underdog story in itself. And then the fact that he started it and everything, it was a massive struggle for him that springboarded his entire career. But if you look at Stallone's two major franchises, Rambo and Rocky, both of these, the first movie in the series, start with a gritty underdog who isn't really victorious at the end, but survives and just fights through, saying I have a right to be here. And then the series kind of take off, and he becomes like this inhuman Superman in the course of those series. In Rambo, he's like an unstoppable killing machine. In Rocky, he still struggles, but he becomes the champion, the champion, the champion. And I think that the echoes there for neurosurgery, especially people in training like myself, we want to just show up and win. We want to win every day, every time, constantly. But in our profession, we don't always win, right? Like it's unfortunately true that sometimes we have bad outcomes. Sometimes there's complications. Dr. Schuster, a lot of the work you do with your trauma patients, gunshot victims, major spinal traumas, you can't always win. And so sometimes the lesson we have to take and the ability we have to have is to just persist and keep going and keep trying. And like you said, Dr. Wang, even if you don't win, just survive through all the rounds. Um, Dr. Schuster, what I guess the lessons we draw from these movies are obvious, to just keep going and keep going. But as your practice in Philadelphia has evolved over the years, how have you kind of nurtured that ability to just keep going and keep going, even when you have someone in front of you that you can't turn into a victory?
well, as I always kid. I always said it's not sports medicine. It's not. It's
Mm.
not. I'm just like, I mean, it's like neurosurgery. I mean, there are times like the highest of highs, like you feel like you are the king of the world,
Hmm.
and on the other hand, it can be the most humbling, absolutely humbling, situation, possible. And we've all had these cases where he's like, even if you did everything right, and you go over it in your mind, like, what would I have done differently? And at the end of the day, you're like, I wouldn't have done anything differently, and the outcome's still bad. I mean,
Yeah.
that's and I think residents in training, I think early on, everybody goes into it with this sort of like fairy tale, oh, neurosurgery, everything's perfect and everything. And we have a hard job. It's not all, not everything's 100% or perfect. And but I think um and early on in your career, it's easy to just brood about those things, like a bad outcome or something. And
Hmm.
it's human nature, and you can't turn into a robot. You can't just like, next, like, it's sort of like, but at the same time, um you have to be able to sort of come to grips with these things. And as you get older and you deal with it more and often, again, not that you become jaded or hollow. It's just that you psychologically, you're better able to take you take the hits and you
Hmm.
keep going, using the Rocky analogy. And so, and I think that's why it's very important to have outside interests. Like, it's I tell people, neurosurgery is what I do. That's not who I am. And like, I don't take my work home. I don't go home and, my wife's not in medicine, and I don't go home and talk about my bad day with her. And, and that, that's why it's very important to like, you know, you know have looking forward to things that are outside work, and be able to this sort of very natural way to to distance yourself from it. I think that's so important.
Yeah, so we should probably issue a disclaimer, JP, that Rocky's tactical boxing mantra is like take a lot of punches to the head and
Yeah.
avoid your opponent out. And they were filmed in the pre-CTE era, so for young impressionable people, this is not the way you box. Just to be clear, right?
Yeah,
But you were program director at Penn for a long time with Sean Grady, right? Like you trained a lot of young people. And if we take the Rocky metaverse, right? So there's Rocky, there is the Creed series now that emanated from that. And then you say, okay, principally there's a boxer, and in most of the early movies it's Rocky, but later it changes. And there's a mentor, a trainer, a coach, and then there's
right,
a nemesis, right? That's kind of like the triangle of Rocky movie, like dialogue.
right,
So you think about the nemesis, like, okay, so there's Apollo Creed, there's Clubber Lang, Mr. T, there's Ivan Drago, right? Dolph Lundgren, and
Yeah.
then you take the trainers, like there's Burgess Meredith, and then there's Carl Weathers, who's Apollo Creed, right? And then
right,
Apollo Rocky himself becomes the trainer in Rocky Five, right?
right.
And in Creed, right? So
Yeah.
when you look at this, can you pick out like who's the best nemesis out of this series that you like in the Rocky metaverse,
Oh,
and who's the best trainer? Like who did the best job?
Yeah,
Because you're a
the
program,
ultimate
you know how
Rocky
to train.
lineup.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking about myself, because it's like, uh Clubber Lang to me is like the because he, like, Rocky loses to him, and he's like disrespectful to him, and he's like, so like, to me, like, like the Rolf Lundgren thing was, he was just sort of like mechanical and robotic, and I know he killed Apollo Creed and things, but like Clubber Lang, because it was not just enough to beat him. He wanted to like humiliate him, like really like drive him down. So, and it's funny because I remember Mr. T before he was Clubber Lang and after he was Clubber Lang. But I thought, you know, you know, just it was just he was kicking a guy when he was down. So that movie to me was like, it wasn't just and then Mickey die. I think, yeah, Mickey
Yeah,
dies in that one. And so I think he was the best
he
sort
had
of,
heart. He had real heart. Like Clubber
yeah,
Lang came from the streets, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, Mr. T for me will always be B.A. Baracus from the A Team.
that's right.
I,
That's
I
right.
do. We're gonna we're gonna get deep for a moment here, and I'm gonna put on the psychologist hat for a second. I think if you look at I would say those are the three chief nemesis of
Right.
Rocky, and I think Apollo was his enemy, but he was never like a bad guy. Like
Yeah.
Drago's a bad guy. He was Rocky's ideal, right? So
Right.
it's aspirational, and so Rocky wanted to defeat him to become him, and
Right.
he's the enemy, but it's not someone that he hates or is evil. It's someone that he adores and wants his position. Clubber
Yeah.
Lang, I think, when I watch that movie, represents the side of Rocky that he doesn't want to take, the aggression, the rage, the animalistic drive that, got Rocky his fortune, but he doesn't want that to take him over and be the only thing that he is, right? He wants to have his wife, his family, Adrian. He wants to have that other gentle side of him. And then Drago is just evil. I mean, that's just pure Cold War. And for me, that's actually my favorite Rocky movie. Just because I like a good, clean villain. And, it right. There's no questions, right? Like if he dies, he dies. Like that's you just want to take that guy down. What about
Yeah.
you, Dr. Wang?
I'm gonna one up both you guys because I know it's controversial. I know that the first movie, of course, is the best, and I liked the third one, Mr. T, the best. That had the most heart, the best soundtrack. I thought as well. I had all the soundtracks as a kid on tape. Right,
Yeah.
that's how bad it was. Eye of the Tiger, all that stuff. Right,
Yeah.
but
I
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
actually, the one I think that's closest to neurosurgery is Rocky Five. Because remember in Rocky Five, he's now kind of like this washed up restaurateur,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
and the new guy comes in and is like kind of disrespecting him, but then Rocky becomes his coach. And there's a lot of emotion. The movie's not filmed as well and produced as well. It's much more modern, but you really see the struggle like you do with your residents.
Yeah.
Like this guy's kind of an asshole. Like he thinks he's better than me, right? I mean, you're PD. You've seen a lot of residents think they know more than you,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And then they got to go get their asses kicked a little bit, then come back and say, Dr. Schuster, how do I fix this problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny, like, because I've run across this, the one case that I find extremely, you'll see, like, when residents get to like the 6 or 7 years, they're pretty cocky, and so I tell you the for me, like, one of the most difficult cases, and the one that I fret about the most, are intramedullary spinal cord tumors,
Hmm.
and it's amazing how humbling that is for a hotshot resident. Like, like, they're like, oh, we'll do this, no problems. And like during the case, like the signals are dropping out, and and like, it's just, and so the number of times that I've had, like, very senior and very skilled residents at the end say, oh my god, that's like one of the hardest cases I've ever done. And so it's, I think so, like, like I said, it's sort of, just, those are the sort of things that'll like stop you in your tracks a little bit. And you're like, ah, hot shot. Okay, well, come on in. Welcome to my world. Like, where I fret like mad for everyone, every one of these things. So yeah.
Well, as a hotshot PGY6, I will take note of that and try to be a little self-aware next time I have one of those cases.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Tip your hat to the attending.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, while you're talking about the training side of things, and as Dr. Wang said, you were program director there for so long with Dr. Grady and shaping the culture, shaping the residency there at Penn. Whenever we have someone on who was a PD or a chair for so long, I love to pick brains about your selection process. And I guess if we're here in the context of the Rocky movies, thinking about the young person coming from the streets who wants to get in and is working so hard to achieve this position and win this thing. And you talked about how this resonated with your own background coming from nowhere, and now you were there in Philly for so long at Penn, having such a hand in selecting the residents that come to the program, much less all the training afterwards. What was your philosophy when you were making the list? What kinds of things did you look for in people that you thought would predict success at your program and then, for life afterwards?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you all know, I mean, when you guys come, you're all like, all very smart with good scores and all these things. And so, for me, like, I used to ask people, give me an example of like how you've overcome adversity in your life, which seems like a really, it's and it's funny, like the spectrum of responses, and the ones that I found, I had people that say, "Look, I can make something up, but I'll be honest with you, I've had a pretty good life." I don't know that there's anything that that I would say is a hardship. Like I didn't get a Rhodes scholarship or something, like so, something like that. And you ask these questions after a while, and then there are some people that come and they've got like real, you know, really overcame hardship in their life, or you know um I'll be honest with you, I'm from a military family, so like military service to me is like a huge thing, and so and so um I, we talk about things like grit and things like that, and it's interesting. So when they, I don't know if you read that book Grit, but they went to the
Mhm.
military academies, and these are the military academies where everybody there was like captain of the football team, and all these things. And what they found is that the dropout rate's pretty high, and part of it is, y- you know it's fine if you're doing things that are in your wheelhouse, like you're very athletic and they're asking you to do all these things. But when you put someone in a position where they have no background in it, like they you can't
Mhm.
fall back on you know physical strength or whatever, and you just have to make it work. That's where the wheels fall off the cart a little bit. And so like I'm all these things are, how do you sort of measure grit in people? But like, and when people come, I'll be honest with you, anymore, when I interview people, I just talk to them. I'm like, what, let's talk about you and your family, and like, what do you do for fun, and things like that. I'm just trying to get a sense of, how people are, as people. But I'm always looking for that little bit of grittiness, like someone willing to scale a fence and climb up a building and knock on the window.
Either that or stupid, right? Dumb. We call it
No,
dumb
no,
stupid.
no, not at all, not at all. So,
So,
yeah,
Jim, so you mentioned earlier what one of the features you love about Rocky is that it brings to the forefront this concept that we face every day, and you brought up the spinal cord tumors, self doubt, right?
yeah,
And in at least the first couple Rocky movies, the first four, there's like in the Act Four phase, right before the finale, Rocky typically will go to his wife Adrian to tally Shire. I don't think he ever had another role, right, other than that role, to derive the moral support and direction that will help him right the ship that's inside his heart or mind, right?
right.
Do you do the same thing? Do you, like, what's your wellspring? You go to your wife, you go to your pastor, you go to your friends. Like, what is the source? Because we all face this self doubt. It's crippling,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, is uh, I don't you know bring things home, but I certainly will talk to my wife about things, and um, she's funny because she's a tough lady. So she's not gonna like she's gonna be like, pull yourself together, like which is sometimes. And like, I'll certainly talk to my senior colleagues, and it's interesting. And I'm sure you get this, Mike, when someone will call you and they want to discuss a case with you, and I think a lot of times that's what it is. It's just like, you need some sort of reaffirmation, or something, like and but yeah, I think the farther you get along in your career, it's a little bit sometimes harder to find that. When you're a junior attending, you're like, like, we have this thing, a few years ago, a couple of my residents would like send me cases to look at, and then it's just on text messages and stuff, completely, HIPAA compliant. But uh and I said, "Oh, this is like spine Facebook." So that's what they started calling the message thread. But now there's like 8 or 10 people in it, and it's like this, and it goes on like on the weekends, at night. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And so I think, especially early on, for for people first starting out, don't be afraid to ask for help. I mean, don't, like I said, there are no unique struggles, and like, you should identify. a mentor or someone, or and sometimes it's not even necessarily in the same like subspecialty or something. It's just like I have like colleagues that are like thoracic surgeons and orthopedic surgeons, where like sometimes talk to them, run things, even though it's like I said, is a lot of it is just where do you find your reaffirmation. So
Hmm.
how about you, Mike? What do you
It's very interesting. Mike Apuz, I've said this so many times. The first 3 years of attendingship, I should say, is the hardest days of your life, right?
Yeah.
Because you're just you want to be confident, but you really can't. You're not equipped to do it. I will tell you that like we have a small spine community, and like Chris Shaffrey, one of your
Oh,
colleagues,
sure.
right? Like I've called people like Chris or Reg Hade, obviously Mike Apuzzo. Like I go to like really senior people who like they've seen it all. And every time it's just been so cathartic because they come back with something even more horrific.
Yeah.
They're really good at this. Like, oh Mike, let me tell you about what happened when I did this. And then even though it doesn't make it go away, you like feel validated. You're like, I get it. This is a shared, like you said, the problems are not that unique.
Yeah, I just taught at a complications course where everybody brings complications, and I tell you, as a subspecialty, we're not maybe really that good at sort of like advertising our complications, but I can tell you, and to your point, I'm there with people that are more senior than me and smarter than me, and like you realize everybody has these complications and things, and so those are extremely valuable learning opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and just to put the bow on it, if that's not the Rocky story, what is?
Yeah,
From the moment we all start, like myself going through training, and you keep getting knocked down, but you keep going to even at the zenith of being a senior surgeon who you think you've seen it all, and then you have to check with your friends. What do I do with this? Did you ever see this? And they tell you, oh, don't worry, we've been there before.
well,
Um,
I always used to remember like Eminem, like they'd show some like shunt disaster, and everybody would be like, "Ah," and then everybody was it was like Shunts Anonymous, or like, "I've done that, I've done that from both sides of the brain." It's just it turns into this sort of like and sort of yeah.
Yeah, you stay in the game long enough and you'll see everything, do everything, and hopefully figure out how to avoid doing it again.
Yeah. And
Um,
again, I can tell you, and again, not to sort of put a damper on things, but the first time you get sued is so emotionally stressful, and it you sort of feel like it's some sort of dirty little secret, and you talk about a time when you need to be able to talk to someone and talk these things through, and unfortunately it's the life we've chosen, as they say, that the first time it happens, it's just that's where you really need to be able to fall back on like senior mentors and to get you through that, because that's a rough go. So that's some serious body shots there. So.
I have so much to look forward to.
No, you
You
you you've chosen a phenomenal
know,
career. Trust me, you really have. And like I said, it really is a great career, and great people, and it's I wouldn't, you look back, would I have made any change or any other choice? Absolutely not. Have no regrets whatsoever, and happy to be where I am. Like so.
yeah. Well, you sign up to fight, you got to expect to get hit in the face, and
Oh yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I got one more actually. Adrian asked Rocky, "Why do you have to fight? Why do you want to fight?" And he said, "I can't sing or dance." So
That's so perfect.
yeah.
That's so perfect.
So we're all here for a reason. Dr. Schuster, this was so much fun. Like I said, I've been wanting to have you on the show for
Well,
years
listen,
now.
I appreciate it. Like I said, as I told the residents, they were very excited. So,
Well, this is great. Anyone watching or listening, I guess my age, younger students, if you haven't seen Rocky, please fix this. Go correct this major deficit in your life and
you know,
acculturation.
it's so funny now.
Watch.
You're getting to a point in your life. She's like, you asked, because I asked like the residents or like the nurses, have you seen Rocky? No. let me get this straight. You
Yeah.
have not seen one of the best movies ever made of all time? No, I've never seen it. Ah, like so.
Well, if we get one new watcher of Rocky
Oh,
from doing this conversation, it will have been worthwhile.
yeah, yeah,
Dr. Schuster, thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure having this
yeah.
conversation. Dr. James Schuster,
All
University of
right.
Pennsylvania.
Listen, great. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you. And I'm never gonna. That story to me is the epitome. I knew you were going places when I saw you when we saw you out the window.
All the sub-eyes are going to do pull-ups now.
All right. Thanks, guys.